So today I'm going to talk about my relationship with a preservation movement, or the preservation of locomotives. And I think it was my love affair with steam engines began in, I think, during my trip to England in the early 1800s. And I was going down with my Shikigami Ran, and we went into London, and we saw this little weird machine thingy with that ran on like a circular track, and it was like, I asked the person in charge of the ride, and because I was interested, it piqued my interest, and apparently this man, Richard Trevithick's son, told me that it was his steam engine, and it was a special kind of steam engine that ran on rails. When we left to go back to what would later become Gensokyo, just the thought of this little metal creature that belched smoke and steam, it's really interesting. So then we came back to England around 1827, I think, and Trevithick had buggered off, and now it was this new guy, George Stephenson, who, he wanted to build a new thing called a railway, a road, especially designed road with the rails, and he built one in Coalbrookdale. I met with him and I saw his steam engine, and I was pretty much amazed by just how... Anyway, he was trying to build this thing to link Manchester and Liverpool, and he eventually did, and I think I got a letter in 1828 saying that the next year would be what would become the Rainhill Trials. So I went with my Shikigami Ran, and we went to the Rainhill Trials, and it was fucking amazing, man. Like, bunch of little locomotives. Back then, they were tiny, like, I think the most driving wheels one had was like 4, and that was it. And Ran, who is really smart, by the way, in fact, one time she calculated the depth of the Zanzu River, and what ended up happening was she ran a couple of calculations, and she said that Novelty was going to win the Rainhill Trials, and I was like, bullshit, Ran, Rocket's going to win. And we made a bet. The bet was that if Rocket won, I would have pretty much a one-night stand with my kitsune, and if Novelty won, Ran would essentially go on vacation for like 2 fortnights and 4 weeks, for like a month. And so I would do all the tasks she normally does, cooking, cleaning, laundry, etc. You cannot believe what I felt when Novelty broke down and Rocket was like... Rocket fucking annihilated all the other engines there. Like, oh my god, like... Ran was so fucking pissed when she heard that Novelty pretty much broke down like twice, and because how much everybody else broke down, they kept bringing out Rocket around the track, so that way, on like victory laps, and I was like, yeah, yes, Ran, I'm gonna fuck your ass tonight. And so I did. And ever since then, I would occasionally go down to England and check out the new locomotives. In fact, for a while, I really liked standard gauge, but then I heard that I went to the Great Western Railway, and back then it was Brunel who was in charge, and the track back then there was no standard gauge. In fact, there was Stevenson gauge, which is, 4 foot, 8.5 inches. Then you got narrow gauge, which Tally Lin was one of the first, and it was like, I think 2 feet 6 inches. The gauge was so narrow that even Stevenson was like, that ain't gonna work. Brunel, the sneaky little bugger he is, his track was 8 feet wide, okay? This fucking wide, and I became a fan of a Brunel gauge because I rode on some of his trains, and I was like, wow, this feels really nice. The coaches, I would have like space for activities. Like, I could probably move into a coach on the Great Western Railway and have that be my house and still have room for to store shit. Like, oh my god. And so, but then as the years went on, I think it was around 1895 where they converted to standard gauge, and I was a little disappointed. That he had that Brunel's one wonderful little railway had to be downsized. But the good news about that is that because of how bloody wide the gauge was, all the structures were like so bloody strong because they were meant for locomotives almost 3 times their width, and therefore handle heavier locomotives. And to this day, a lot of that early Great Western Railway infrastructure still stands today and is still being used. I was a particularly big fan of the Great Northern Railway, mostly because of how stylish their engines were. Like the Stirling singles, like, man, those were sexy machines, like really sexy machines. And I'm not talking about, Ramu, I'm talking about the Stirling singles, man. And then Ivic came, and he came out with his Atlantics, and I was like, cool. The only problem was that when the Atlantics first came out, they had narrow fireboxes, they didn't perform as well, and so he had to come up with these big boiler ones, which look fat. Whatever. Funny enough, the London, Brighton, South Coast Railway came out with their own Atlantic, and I'm like, really? Is that just a GNR C2, C1, or whatever? Which was with the serial number filed off? Like, really? Beachy head? Anyway, whatever. And so, then Gresley came up. Now, Gresley I was a huge fan of to the point where I was courting him, and it was mostly just to get plans for his new Pacific design because I wanted to build a railway in Gensokyo, but alas, the Hakurei Shrine Maiden at that time, it was way before Rainbow's time, was like, no, I am not letting you gonna build this giant strip of rock and steel, rock, wood, and steel, just to have these smoky little creatures noisily go up and down. I was a little disappointed, and I think Gensokyo would have benefited from a rail network, but whatever. I wasn't allowed to build. This was the days before spell cards were a thing, so it was either not build the railway or get exterminated, because yokai extermination was a huge business back then. Now in the age of spell cards, it's just a matter of, whatever, you have a little dispute with your yokai. A human has a dispute with his yokai friends, and they have a spell card duel, and the winner pretty much wins the argument. But back then it was like, it was either yeet or be yeeted, whatever. So, Gresley, I end up having well, this is something most people don't know, is that I had a one-night stand with Nigel back in the day. And this is mostly just so that way I could steal his plans for the A1. I was this close to getting the plans, this close. I did, however, steal one of his, I think, plans for like the N2, which I was so disappointed, because why the hell would I want a Suburban tank? Of course, nowadays, I would totally buy like a fleet of N2s because they're so good looking. Yeah, this close to getting the plans for the A1, and which was probably for the best, because when the A1s first came out, they were fast. They were fast fuckers, and that was all well and good. But the Grizzly Holcroft valve gear was very temperamental at the time, so a lot of maintenance issues. If I built one, there would be a lot of maintenance issues with getting the Grizzly gear to work properly, because it's a little complicated when you're trying to build, when you're running a locomotive with 3 cylinders, only 2 valve gear, and the third piston is operated by a little adding machine, hence the Grizzly Holcroft gear. But anyway, in fact, if I wanted a A1, I could have just waited, I think, a good 40 to 50 years, and I would have bought one. Eventually I did. I first came into contact with the preservation movement, I think, in the late 50s, because at that time, the 1955 modernization plan was in full effect. At that point, everybody was just getting rid of their steam locomotives, at least in Europe, and I pretty much went on a grand tour in Europe trying to save a bunch of steam locomotives, and that's how I ended up with a Champlain Pacific and a couple of ex-German, ex-Deutsche Bundesbahn steam locomotives, which is fine, But it was England where I really concentrated my efforts, and that's how I met my good friend, Dr. Peter Beat, and we were going around buying up as many steam locomotives as we possibly can. Originally, he was going to get a Pacific, but he didn't have the money. Me, on the other hand, because I've been around for so long, I've been around for like 1,200 years now, and so I have a lot of Koban built up from just years and years. I think I had like 3.5 tons of the stuff stored in my gaps, and I bought the Pacific. And best of all, it was a Grizzly Pacific. And so I am in ownership of a Grizzly A3 Pacific. I'm the only other person to own one. So suck it, NRM, you're not the only ones. Anyway, that's how I met Audrey for the first time, back when he was helping out with the Tallinn Railway. And honestly, I've been reading his books ever since the very beginning, like since 1945. And when I heard that there was going to be a TV series done on his books, like in Gensokyo, this was before internet or satellite TV, so getting ITV in Gensokyo was a really difficult thing to do. And I think I did this really complicated thing where I set up gaps, and in gap space I had a special transmitter that managed to get television all the way from England in Gensokyo. And so what ended up happening was that I got to see Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends all the way in Gensokyo, and not having to wait until it got localized, a couple of years ahead. So, and it was good. Like, I think getting ITV was, the best thing for the Yakimo household at the time, because I was really into Thomas, and Rand got interested into Coronation Street through me watching ITV all the bloody time, and that's why my kitsune is a Cory fan for some bloody reason, Ugh. As far as other railway-related things, I am also in ownership of a Billington E2, and as much as everybody gives the E2 shit, like, the E2 is never good at push-pull commuter service, it can barely do freight, its fuel capacity is so bloody awful, like, Jesus Christ, guys, give the engine some bloody credit, alright? They were good at shunting. Sure, they oscillated, going like this whenever it reached anything more than 50 miles an hour, but they were good tank engines, all right? I don't care how bloody awful it is. I feel like the E2s is just a victim of bad press, you know, all sorts of bloody awful things that everybody gives the E2. And like everybody, like Chris Hedden Green, for example, he pretty much hates the he doesn't, in one of his videos he says he doesn't hate the E2s, but he kind of doesn't like that because of the E2's association with Thomas the Tank Engine, that pretty much railway preservationists hate it apparently. But I like Thomas, and I'm a preservationist, albeit all my British, German, French. I think one time I had an American locomotive at some point, but I ended up selling it because it was so goddamn heavy, and the small rail line that I built for myself in Mayohiga was only built to handle European locomotives, and my North American locomotive was so bloody heavy that it pretty much spread the rails, and that led to a nasty crash, and I ended up having to sell it, and I think I sold it to a Kappa who ran a technical school, and that's how we managed to teach locomotive design, by showing it off. But you know, I guess I can't have a 484 on my railway, you know. Oh well. So honestly, I just feel like the E2 gets bad rep, you know, just because, you know, it exists and it pretty much was shit at everything. But I don't think it's shit at everything. In fact, the fact that with some modifications, E2 can be pretty good at what it can do. Like, I think Ran, and I think Neatery built an E2, but we built it with a Champlonian streamlining. I think we changed the boiler so that way it wouldn't be so shit. And I think we made a couple of changes to it where it wasn't so shit. I think we managed to get this modified E2, I think, to a really good 55 miles an hour and not suffer any oscillation. On my rail line, we tested out push-pull and short-trip freight. And because of the redesigned boiler, and because we slightly enlarged the coal bunker, we managed to get it to not eat up so much bloody fuel. So therefore, the E2 is a good design. It just needs a better boiler, slightly increased bunker, and some other slight changes. Otherwise, it's a good design. Anyway, I think that's really it for my association with railroading, and or at least British railroading is concerned. Like, you know, often I would go to England, you know, make a couple appearances at like the Severn Valley. I think one time I popped in the Keith Valley and the Keithworth and the KVWR, the Keith Valley and Worth Railway, and saw some old friends there. You know, I ran a locomotive, albeit I think the last, that was in, I think the early 2000s. I think nowadays they want all the drivers to do all this training, you know, to make sure they're, like, they have a huge safety fetish over there, especially at the fucking BBC. Like, Jesus Christ. I tried filming an educational series about locomotives, similar to what Chris Evan Green did, but it was for the BBC, and I think what ended up happening was that some of my techniques were a little unsafe, you know, but that's just me being 1,200 years old. You know, I've seen some shit, you know, lots of shit, you know, and I think that's really it. As far as other things are concerned, with Thomas the Tank Engine in particular, don't like Big World, Big Adventures. No, BWBA? No. Seen a couple of the episodes. I like the SOTOR episodes. Also, why the hell are you reusing models, 3D models for Big World, Big Adventures? Like, why are you doing that? Like, Jesus Christ, Pokemon, everybody's given flack for Pokemon Sword and Shield for using 3D models from the 3DS games, and yet nobody in the Thomas community is giving you shit for reusing models for new characters. Like, Jesus Christ, like, I don't think in India they have Stand Your Black Fives, okay? No. And London, Brighton, South Coast Railway coaches in China? Nope. Nope, 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 nope. Yeah. Yeah, I'll probably make another video highlighting probably other life stuff in the life of Yukari and, you know, like, such as, like, the fact, like, on views, like, how I think the East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere would have worked could have worked in my political opinions, you know, but, which, by the way, are ultra-conservative. Again, I've seen many things, like, such as the fact that I think Gensoko should focus more on getting back those fucking Lunarians, because, like, seriously, fuck the Lunarians. Like, Irin, like, honestly, the Lunarians, I know, like, Irin, Kaguya, they're awesome. They're awesome, and mostly because they provide a really good service that we all need. But the Lunarians that are still on the fucking moon, like, shut the fuck up, or maybe I'll invade you, because I tried invading the moon once, and I did it mostly just to shut the yokai up about going to war all willy-nilly. You know. But, you know, I think I'm just going to cut it off right now. Toodles.